I have sound here? Hello, do I have sound here?
It's not working, yeah?
Is this one working? No, it's not. Where are the audio guys? Is it working
Now it's okay, yeah? Please, dear colleagues.
Yes, like Irache says, please take your seats. It's great to see a full house. This is amazing. My name is Chris Burns, and I'm glad to be with you. This is the Socialists and Democrats group talk about the social pillar, the state of the social union. This is before next week's State of the Union message from Commission President von der Leyen. What about the social issues? What about that social pillar that we established in 2017? And how far have we come with those 20 principles on all kinds of issues like minimum wage, working conditions, unemployment insurance, access to jobs, social protections, child care? How far have we come with that? And especially with the COVID crisis, both slowing things down, but also with the recovery perhaps helping us achieve some of those goals. I don't want to go any further on that, but let's keep in mind that we have many different speakers. We have speakers, policymakers, labor representatives. We have civil society, think tanks, and you. And we are online too. So we are welcoming also everyone who is listening online. And those who would like to pose questions in the panels, please do. We're going to go low tech. Raise your hand. And one other tech tip, let's see here, is interpretation. We have wonderful interpreters here for English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Ukrainian. And hashtag Social Europe. Keep in mind those hashtags. If you hear a great soundbite, please send it out, tweet like a beast. Social Europe, hashtag Social Europe, and hashtag SOTEU. Yeah, SOTEU. SOTEU. Let's begin with the opening keynotes. Irache Garcia Perez, President of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats. We were also together at the summit in Porto in 2021. And yes, what achievements and challenges are ahead, Irache?
A lot. Okay, I will speak about this achievement, but before that, I would like to thank you, all of you, for your presence in this important event. 1 week before the last debate about the future of the European Union, about the State of the Union, it's a key element for our political family to organize this type of exchange, to have the opportunity to discuss at the different levels, with the government levels, with the trade unions, civil society, and of course, with our members of the group about who will be our key elements, our priorities during the next months in this last part of the term. Sin duda alguna, la consolidación.
Well, without a doubt, we need to consolidate the social pillar of the EU. We need to see greater social progress in the Union and more economic justice. This is something that falls to all S&D member in any area of our work. So, Vice President, dear Nadia, thank you for your leadership and thank you for your fantastic economic management during difficult years in Spain and difficult years across Europe. Your achievements have proven that it's not the right who best manages the economy. It's the left. You've shown us we can be more competitive, but it doesn't need to be contradictory to say that we're more competitive but also fairer and more sustainable. The Spanish government has had a key role in progressive response to the economic crises in a very difficult situation. Firstly, as a result of the COVID crisis and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now the S&D response needs to continue to lead the reforms with the EU and that we need reform of the electric market and the financial market. We also need to see a digital and green economy. We committed ourselves in 2017 in Gothenburg to the social pillars. We've seen work done on minimum wage, we've got the youth guarantee, we've got better conditions for platform workers and new ways to reduce the pay gap between men and women. As a result of our work in the S&D group, in the European institutions, led in the European Commission by Commissioner Schmit and by the S&D group here in the European Parliament, we have been able to make this reality. This is a result of compromise, consensus and work which has been done, but always with the leadership of the S&D group. And if we didn't have that leadership, we wouldn't have achieved what we've achieved. However, a lot still needs to be done. We're seeing cost of living crisis, we're seeing mortgages skyrocketing, inflation figures still very high, and this stopping people achieving what they want to do. So we want to consolidate the social pillar. We want to see housing made available for people and not just as a commodity. We want to see equality in employment. We want to see an end to unpaid internships. We want to see new rules to protect those workers who suffer the impacts of climate change. This needs to be one of the priorities that we need to address. Our commitment is very clear. We will further the rights of workers in all areas, and we will protect those who are most vulnerable. So that could be young people, women who suffer from gender violence, or persons with disabilities. For this to be a reality, we will commit ourselves to a fiscal capacity based on two instruments. And this is one that my colleague, Ms. Calvino, will be working on, the SURE program, the SURE program, and the recovery program. Thank you again, Nadia, for being here. Whenever we call you, you turn up. Thank you for your work, and thank you because we are aware of the fact that you have some major challenges ahead of you. There are major challenges for the entirety of the EU. For us to continue proudly defending the S&D values, we need to do that and continue to show that we can move forward in a social, fair and sustainable manner. Thank you. Nadia, over to you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Irache, por...
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in the European Parliament once again. Obviously, I think it is my house as well. It's a pleasure to be here with so many different friends and so many people who are committed to the future of Europe.
Back home, good afternoon, everyone. Dear Irache, dear Chris, and dear colleagues, I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on this very hectic, intense day here in Brussels on the state of the social union. And since I'm going to be the first to address this subject in what promises to be a very interesting exchange and very lively exchange, I thought I could maybe go from the more general perspective to the more detailed approach to all these issues, very briefly talking about the world, about Europe, and then about what Spain has to contribute to this debate and to the future of Europe to have a more balanced, a more inclusive, a more sustainable Europe going forward. Let me start with a very obvious assertion, which is that the global context is extremely complicated and challenging. The world has become a more difficult place to understand. I very often use the idea that the tectonic plates on which the global order was based after the end of Second World War are shifting, and some are clashing in some instances, and some others are, or in some other areas, actually those plates are drifting apart, and this is what we're seeing. There are very important changes. There are very important challenges and conflicts, which are some more visible, others underlying our realities, and which have a very deep impact from the security point of view, also from the technological point of view, the economic, monetary, and financial point of view, and obviously also from the social point of view. And this requires a new approach to a number of areas. We need to wake up to the fact that the world is changing and there is a new world which is in the making and which is also open to be shaped right now if we make the right decisions right now. And in order for Europe to continue to play the key role that we have played until now, and in order for Europe to continue to be the beacon of peace, prosperity, solidarity, all those European values that we're so proud of, we need to build alliances. It's very important that we continue to be guiding and leading international debates, and that we continue to be an open continent to build alliances with all those that want to go in the same direction. This brings me to the second point, the state of Europe. Where are we heading towards? And I think that in the last years, and you were talking, Iratxe, about the fact that we are reaching the end of the mandate of the Commission, the end of the parliamentary term, and thus it is a very good moment to make a balance, and the State of the Union speech is obviously the key point in time, but today we have a good opportunity in these debates to make a balance, to look back, and also to feel proud about a number of developments that have taken place, because I think it's fair to say that this time it really has been different than in the past. We have been confronted with great crisis, but the European response has been extremely different to the one that was given to crisis in the past. The response to the pandemic, you mentioned it. The fact that we set in place in the spring of 2020 already, I will never forget it, mechanisms such as SURE that has enabled national governments to support jobs, to support the economic tissue, to support companies. The fact that the response was clearly one of solidarity. We realized we were all in the same boat. And very shortly thereafter, in July 2020, leaders already agreed to set in place a massive investment and reform program, so that we not only dealt with what was urgent, but also looked forward and dealt with what is important. Europe needs to have a green transition. We need to live for future generations, a more sustainable world. And this was a very strong acknowledgement that led to a first in our lifetimes program to build the Next Generation EU funds, to raise money in capital markets, to undertake a massive investment plan along common European priorities. And this, I think, is something that we should be extremely, extremely proud of. And likewise, I think we have to be also proud of the unity we are showing in supporting Ukraine, because that means that we're also supporting European democratic values, which are being represented by this aggression at the borders, of our union. Likewise, I think that in these times where there is so much call for protectionism, and many seem to be thinking that we have to go back to beggar than neighbor policies, and that this global trade is a sum-zero game, and therefore, in order to reinforce our strategic autonomy, we have to close our borders. I think the open strategic autonomy approach is one which is building on the fact that Europe is a trade international powerhouse, and that we have a strong internal market we need to preserve. And these strengths need to be at the basis of our response to the challenges and the tensions between the different international I was going to say, and I am going to say, superpowers. Some are existing, some are emerging, where Europe needs to have a strong voice, but one that is also based on those underlying principles and values that have driven the European economy and have made our societies prosperous since the beginning of the European Union. And my final example that I think we need to be proud of is the fact that all along this period, we have been leading the green transition. Europe is the loudest voice in all international gatherings that have to talk about the fight against climate change. It is a global endeavor, but Europe has been at the forefront. And actually, we have been showing the way forward, because Europe has been growing for decades while bringing down CO2 emissions. So we are an example of success. How can we have a sustainable, inclusive economy going forward? I think that all these elements are actually developments in the past mandate. The European Parliament has been very strongly calling for this response, a united response, one based on solidarity, thinking about companies and the economy, but also about citizens, and more importantly, thinking about the present, but with a progressive approach, a future-looking approach to ensure that we leave a better world for younger generations. And this brings me to my third point, and that is Spain. It's important to talk about Spain, not only because Irache and I were Spanish, not only because I'm currently the vice president of the Spanish government, but the Spanish presidency is underway. So I think it could be useful to also share some thoughts on where the Spanish presidency is taking these debates. What is our approach? What are our priorities? And I think it's important also to share the view of Spain, because in these last 5 years, for the past 5 years, we have been at the forefront of all these debates, and proud to say we have been leading some of these debates, because we have had a very coherent economic policy based on 3 principles: fiscal responsibility, social justice, and structural reforms. We have dealt with the urgent challenges, but without losing sight of what's important, that we had a clear roadmap to make the most of the digitalization process that's taken place at global level, and that we wanted to have a managed green transition, a fair transition, where we would avoid shocks and surprises that would, at the end of the day, be much more costly for our societies and our economies. And as I look back, I think, one of the first decisions we took as we took office in the government in 2018 was removing the tax on the sun. Because, okay, today you have a very sunny day here in Brussels, but we all know this is not a common feature of the weather in this part of Europe. But actually, Spain has many days of sun and many hours of sun. Actually, just now I was seeing that today we have reached the record of sun-generated, solar-generated power in Spain. The increase since last year has been more than 30%. And that is thanks to the fact that for the past 5 years, we have consistently implemented a roadmap to deploy renewables in Spain, and to ensure that we were at the forefront of the new technologies to try to bring down energy prices, but also to have cleaner energy generation in our continent. And this clear roadmap and this consistent roadmap, I think, is the right way forward in trying to face those challenges also at European level. I could say, to a certain extent, we have done our homework. And this allows us to lead these debates, be it on the energy reform you were referring to, Irache, a moment ago, be it on the fiscal reform, the new fiscal rules that we are working on in the ECOFIN environment, be it the debate about the role of Europe in this global new reality that is in the making. And this leads me or this makes it clear what are our priorities on the economic field under our presidency, those files on which we're working very hard and very intensely. First, four pillars. First, deepening the economic and monetary union, in particular, having new fiscal rules which are fit for purpose. And there is a broad consensus throughout all member states, and I think throughout the whole EU, and I hope also across political parties, that what we need to achieve is a fiscal framework that ensures fiscal sustainability in the mid to long term, so that we have clear rules and we have a coherent approach that provides certainty and financial stability, but which is compatible and also drives and supports growth and job creation, and the massive investment effort that is needed in Europe, both public and privately, to drive these twin green and digital transitions. And this requires us to have a stronger economic and monetary union. This requires us to have new fiscal rules, which, together with the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework, and I know there are some colleagues in the room that are looking at this very closely, together with the new own resources, something that is also very dear to the Parliament, with all those files that have to do with deepening the banking union, deepening the economic and monetary union. I have the chair of the Econ committee here. I mean, any one of these files would be the star in any presidency. Now the Spanish presidency, coming at the end of the mandate, obviously has a number of key files. I probably think, you know, the most interesting one and the one attracting most public attention is the fiscal rules, but that doesn't mean that we neglect any of the other files on which we're working very intensely to try to bring as many over the line by the end of the year. Second priority, competitiveness of European industry, of the European economy. And this is very directly linked with strategic autonomy. This is linked to the energy reform so that we have clean and cheap energy to the benefit of European companies. This has to do with protecting the internal market, obviously, and all those files that ensure that we continue to thrive and our economy continues to thrive going forward. Third top priority, digital. Artificial intelligence. The Artificial Intelligence Act is one of the highlights of our presidency. We're working very closely also with the European Parliament, and I know that some of the persons probably here are some of the most important rapporteurs in this debate. There are other files in the digital area, but the artificial intelligence file is one we need to really get an agreement on because there's no time to lose. The digitalization process is unstoppable, but we need to steer it in the right direction. Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act are very important pillars, but the AI Act will also be key to shape a digitalization which is humanistic, which protects our individual and collective rights and values and builds a better society going forward. And my final, and the fourth and final top priority is global Europe and building these alliances and partnerships. Next week, we will hold the informal ECOFIN Council in Santiago de Compostela, bringing together not only the finance ministers of the EU, but also finance ministers of Latin American and Caribbean countries. I just had a meeting with commissioners, and I will be holding meetings today to the effect of having a successful ECOFIN Council meeting, where we agree on a number of projects which can be game changers for the Latin American region. So profiting from the role of Spain as the gateway between the EU and America, the gateway between the EU and Africa, we want to reinforce this strategic partnership, putting our money where our mouth is, ensuring that all investments which take place from the EU budget and also involving multilateral financial institutions are focusing on a limited number of projects that can drive the green and digital transition in Latin America and Caribbean countries. There are many other issues that are ongoing and that we are working on, but I thought, I think these four pillars can give you a sense of how we are driving forward the Spanish presidency, and I am quite confident that we will be able to succeed in an agreement in many of these files, which are very important to shape the present, but more importantly, the future of the EU in the coming months and in the coming years. Let me close on this point. I was telling you all those elements that I think we can be proud of, how the European response to the crisis that we've been confronted with in the past 5 years has been very different to the past and has shown that the principles of sustainable and development growth are really rooting the public dialogue and the public policies and the actions, not only the words, but also the actions by the EU, which I think is very encouraging as to our role going forward as a beacon of peace, prosperity, but also solidarity and justice in the world. But I also think, and I'm going to leave you with this thought, we cannot be complacent. We cannot be complacent because citizens in Europe have suffered enormously from the crisis that we have lived in these past 5 years. And their expectations are changing also with regards to the deliverables by national governments, by European institutions, including by members of parliament. They expect their institutions to protect them, to give them confidence, to give them trust in this changing world. And I think that that requires on all of us that are at the front line, of public communication and policy making, to be even more self-demanding when it comes to making the right decisions and communicating in a clear manner, one that builds trust between all of us, between the different countries, between our partners, and with the citizenship in Europe. Because without this trust and support by European citizens, we will certainly not be able to pursue this path that I think has been the basis of which have been planted during this last mandate. But we will need to develop and make more prosperous and continue to implement in the coming mandate. I am confident that we will be able to find the right words to bring the trust of citizens to support the European project, to reinforce support for the European project. Spain is a very pro-European country, so I am sure that Spain will be one of the parts of Europe bringing more pro-European approaches also in the next mandate. But I think we have to be, as I was saying, self-demanding, building of what we have achieved in the past mandate, and being ambitious also going forward, not only from the national, but also from the European and from the global perspective, if we want Europe to continue to play an important role in the world which is in the making around us. Let me leave you with this, my confidence that we will achieve that, and thank you very much again for having this opportunity to address you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Thank you, Madam Minister. I think that's working, right? Yeah. And also to Irache for setting the stage for these next panels, to find that balance between, to be able to do both, to make that socially just transition, and at the same time be fiscally responsible. Hats off to you for making that happen in Spain, and also Irache for setting the stage for our talks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let us move on. The next event here is on Ukraine. I'd like to invite Esther Lynch, General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC, and Grigory Tsovi and Natalia Levitska. If you could please come up.
Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
I think Max has left their phone. So I think Irache, I have your phone. So just to let know that, I'll turn it over so I don't see who's calling. I know that I'm going to have an opportunity to look in more detail this afternoon, but it gives me a particular pleasure to introduce this part of the discussion. In Berlin in May, the European Trade Union family took into membership the workers and their trade unions from Ukraine. In doing so, we had two messages. The first of those is that workers in Europe and our trade unions stand with the people of Ukraine in the long term. The second message that we had was a practical one. It's that social justice, social progress needs to be developed and put in place now. What we're going to hear is from our colleagues from Ukraine, to hear from them what are the challenges and what they see as being the key steps they would like to see us take in the coming period to support them in their work. Then when they've finished, I'd like to say a little bit about the mission that we're going to go on to Ukraine in October, and I very much hope, talking to my friend and your coordinator, Agnes Jongerius, about including the European Parliament and her in that delegation too. So I'd like to make a mention about that at the end. But first of all, if I can give over to the colleagues from Ukraine. I think, Natalia, are you going first, or is Gregory? Gregory, over to you.
Доброго дня всім.
Greetings, everyone. I am the head of the Trade Union Federation of Ukraine. It's the largest trade union association in Ukraine. In our membership, we have almost 3 million trade union members across all of the sectors of the economy. And they work in the public sector, in the private sector, in the communal services. And today, as you understand, they're doing an extremely difficult and an important job to provide, to supply the front line with everything that we need to defend Ukraine from the armed aggression from Russia. And this requires a great concentration of effort. The work is sort of takes it to the limit of our possibilities. There's a lot of work, and a lot of facilities where people are working are on the front line, basically. We call it level 0. This is where hostilities are ongoing, or this is a neighboring territory to the front line, to the area of armed conflict. But then, in the end, there is no safe place in Ukraine anywhere, because the Russian Federation has missiles that can reach any point, any part of our territory, and these missiles spare no one. First of all, the civilian population, which bears the brunt of the suffering. And while we were coming here, while we were on the road, I spoke to my wife, and she told me there's been another missile attack on Kyiv. We are sincerely grateful to Europe and to America for providing us with air defense capabilities. So we have something to defend ourselves with, and not only to defend ourselves, but also to liberate our occupied territories step by step. And this is what solidarity and dignity is about. This is Europe supporting Ukraine. Ukraine is also part of the European continent, and it has determined its future as a part of the European family. It has taken decisions that cost us a lot of blood. During the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, when the question arose which direction Ukraine will go, towards Russia, towards the communist camp, or will it start moving towards Europe, more than 100 laid down their lives in the struggle against the regime that wanted us to keep us in the authoritarian system without democracy and without freedom. This is why when Ukraine was accepted as a candidate state, I was actually here in June last year, and we had meetings here. And of course, that is the evaluation to an extent of the heroic deed of the Ukrainian people who are currently defending their own freedom, but also the democracy and freedom on the continent. Our civil society and our trade unions supported the European choice, and my organization, our federation, adopted a strategy at our Congress. It's called European Choice. And for us, it's very important to ensure European values, the rule of law, freedom, democracy, and of course, social Europe, social issues. And the very formula that says that the economy should be socially focused is extremely important for us in Ukraine. That's a symbol and a very important requirement as well, because I will be honest with you, over the last several dozens of years, we saw a new oligarchic system in the making, and the redistribution of social benefits, social good, was not fair. People were becoming poorer, and a very small share of the society was becoming increasingly richer. And they were increasing their power and increasing their businesses. And everything that's been declared, everything that's being done, and everything that we've just heard from this podium, said by the previous speakers, they were talking about what the citizens of our country want. And our challenge is that the Ukraine, according to its constitution, is a social state. It's a democratic state, and it's a state of the rule of law. But to make sure all of these things are real, takes a lot of work. And this requires consolidation in our country between politics, business, and civil society. And this is something that we genuinely strive for. Over the years of independence as an expert, and then later when I was elected to be the head of the Federation of Trade Unions, I know that we worked with almost 120 laws, which basically gave us a formula for the social focus for our state. We needed to make another step to make sure that our economy would produce enough resources that would meet social needs, social requirements, and also very important that the social economy would not just be a small part of the economy, but actually the economy and social policy would go hand in hand. And then the distribution of the social good would be more fair. Unfortunately, we were not able to achieve this, but we actually created a legal foundation for the social state. It talks about employment, protection of labor. We updated the labor code and did a lot of things that include tripartite dialogues, collective bargaining, etc., etc. But what we need to understand that when we speak about the future of Ukraine in the European Union, by the way, our Vice Prime Minister Olga Stefanishyna, she's in charge of European integration, when she spoke to Charles Michel about 10 years that the EU is giving Ukraine to become a member, she told them it will take 2 years. It will take 2 years for us to be ready. We'll be ready in 2 years. We'll be ready to meet the requirements of the Maastricht Treaty. And we, the trade unions, will do everything to make sure she's right. And we will be able to become an EU member state. We hope, we count on your help. We count on the help from the Socialists and Democrats, because the political spectrum is quite interesting, let's say, in Ukraine, because we had a monopoly on political power. We had different configurations in the parliament. We as trade unions tried to promote the workers' rights. We also, obviously, we worked with all of the fractions, but we needed to find a support base somewhere. And currently it's a lot more difficult because one fraction can take a decision that it sees necessary, and very often it focuses, looks towards liberalization without the social component. And of course we then have conflicts. However, the war has forced us to unite and seek solutions. Even in these very difficult circumstances, we need to solve our do our job number one first, to defend Ukraine, defend our families, and to bring peace back to our land. These are the most strategic issues currently before us. And maybe one more thought in the context of whether or not we'll become social Europe. You shouldn't disappoint us, because we always looked at you for social Europe. You are the role model for us, what many countries are doing, including Spain. We know our colleagues. I've been to the Congress of the Austrian colleagues. I could see how in Austria social models and configuration of these three parties build, how together they can do a lot of good things. So this is what we would like to see from you, how you do it, because we are looking to you for this. We need to be motivated. Our citizens need a lot of motivation to support us on this way to Europe. So I hope that you will provide this support. And this is a chance for us, for Ukrainian workers, also to achieve welfare and social justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Grigori. Now, Natalia, you were promised 4 minutes and you're going to get it. I'm going to make sure you get those 4 minutes. So I asked John, who's probably standing by in the White House waiting to come and speak to us, but I asked him to give you those 4 minutes. I want to give them to you, so please take them. Thank you, Natalia.
Дякую, колеги. Дякую. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm representing the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. And I'm honored to speak on behalf of our confederation and Ukrainians. Unfortunately, we suffer from this unjustified war of aggression from Russia, and every day there are our businesses and children and citizens under fire. They are killed and businesses are destroyed. So it's very difficult to live in war circumstances, and we are fighting to defend Ukraine and Europe and the entire world because we lost 5 million jobs, unfortunately, because of this war. Russia destroys our healthcare facilities, our educational institutions, but we fight for our future, and we will not give up. It's a challenge. This war is a challenge to the entire civilized world. And of course, this war creates problem, not only in the world, in Ukraine, but in the world also. 4 million Ukrainian women had to flee abroad, and we are very grateful to your countries for supporting our women and our children while Ukrainian men are defending Ukraine from the aggressor. Today, we see a new challenge. It's an employment challenge. It's wages drop. And the martial law limits labor rights. Of course, we are going towards the EU, but we have restrictions, and there are improvements we are looking forward to, so that it becomes a human-centered economy. And let's think about our Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. It's a true forced labor because Russians force Ukrainian workers to sign contracts with them. So it's unbelievable. In the 21st century, workers are tortured, and people who want to live in Ukraine, unfortunately, are denied this elementary right. Their human rights are violated by Russia. But Russia will not succeed in destroying Ukraine because Ukraine understands that our future lies within Europe. And we have been fighting for European values. Yes, we have been paying a very high price, but we do believe that we will become members of the European Union. And we would like to become this fully fledged EU member because we want to rebuild our Ukraine within Europe after our victory. So our task today is to align the Ukrainian legislation to the EU regulations based on social rights, social justice, and respect towards collective bargaining and trade unions, not only in words but in deeds. And we do hope that future investments will help Ukraine to rebuild better. It's an extremely important question. What will be in Ukraine after the end of this war? and we are ready to go on, and we will fight to our victory. And after peace is back, we will base our economy on social rights and collective bargaining to become a real, true European social country. And thank you very much for your support, and glory to Ukraine.
So I get a chance later on to come back here and say something. So I'm just going to stop now and give back to the moderator who will be kind to me in the next panel.
Thank you, Esther, and also thank you to Natalia and to Gregory. Thank you very much. There were, of course, many other points we wanted to cover on that, and perhaps we can in the next panel, panel 2 with Esther. Let us move on virtually to John Podesta. I hope we are connected via audio. John, can you hear me?
I can, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's fabulous, fantastic. John Podesta, for those who might not know him, Senior Advisor at the White House for Clean Energy Innovation and Implementation, also founder of the Center for American Progress think tank. You also co-chaired the President Obama's transition team, and you were a chief of staff for President Clinton. You know what you're talking about when it comes to running on a national level a program that makes a transition. And before we get to that, can you give just a quick comment on what you heard about Ukraine and the fact that their transition, their recovery, also has to be done in a socially just way, correct?
Absolutely, Chris. I'm sorry I missed the presentation in the earlier panel, but I think the support the United States has given, in addition to the military support on in the energy sector, has been with the intention of doing that, both to meet the immediate needs, given the destructive power that the unlawful invasion of Ukraine and the continued prosecution of the war by the Russians has targeted that energy sector. So to meet and address the immediate needs, but also to kind of build a more sustainable future and to really focus on issues around accountability, transparency, etc., which I think will improve the ability to deliver for the Ukrainian people and to put people to work on the project of first dealing with the current crisis, but then dealing with rebuilding in a more just and sustainable way.
Right, and that's what we want to see also, of course, in Europe in this transition. How is that working in the United States? How are you making this targeted direct investments for workers and communities as part of that Inflation Reduction Act? That's hundreds of billions of dollars there.
Well, Chris, if you'll let me just go on for a little bit, I want to thank you, and I want to thank President Garcia Perez for putting together this important meeting. It's a critical meeting for the Social Democratic Project. How do we tackle the climate crisis in a way that builds more just, equitable, sustainable economies and societies? I wish I could have joined you in Brussels. But, you know, as you are well aware, the histories of the U.S. and Europe have been intertwined literally for hundreds of years. So it's a privilege to speak to you at this moment when we have the power to chart our shared future together. I think we're feeling the urgency of the climate crisis like never before in the U.S. We've had devastating fires in Hawaii, catastrophic flooding in the Northeast. Yeah. Extreme heat and drought in the Southwest, and Hurricane Idalia in the Southeast just in the past month. Yeah. And of course, this summer, people across Europe have experienced scorching heat waves, devastating fires in the places my grandparents came from, flooding and landslides. The climate crisis is truly an existential threat. It's already here. Yeah. That means we have to seize the moment of peril and turn it into opportunity. That's what we're trying to do with the IRA. Right. No more delay, no more kicking the can down the road. It's time to jump in with both feet. For the U.S., that meant passing historic climate investments through the Inflation Reduction Act. The law is already accelerating our transition to clean energy. It's putting us on a path to reach our national target of cutting emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. Just by way of comparison, that's essentially on an apples-to-apples basis equivalent of a 55% reduction that Europe is trying to achieve.
Right.
Our mission was inspired by Europe's leadership on climate through laws like the Green Deal. Now with the Inflation Reduction Act, we hope to inspire even more action both here in the United States, in Europe, and around the world, and make it easier for other nations to achieve their goals.
Now, where we're also kind of struggling with here in Europe also is trying to make that green transition in a just way, a socially just way. How are you accomplishing that or trying to accomplish that in the U.S. with that Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, it's truly built into the law. I think the core of this project really is to support private sector activity. We describe it as government-enabled but private sector-led, which comes in the form of tax incentives to invest and deploy clean energy, both in traditional spaces like solar, wind, geothermal, transmission, and others, but also in newer technologies like green hydrogen, direct air capture, et cetera. But those tax credits have features that are really unusual and first time in the United States. For example, you get 5 times the credit for deploying clean energy if you pay prevailing wages and use registered apprentices, which levels the playing field between low-road non-union contractors and union contractors. That we just released new updated guidance on that question. I think it was very well received. It means that the people who are going to do this work can be through both the apprenticeship program and through the incentive to take advantage of these enhanced tax credits, ensure that people can have careers in this clean energy field. Last week, I was just out in New Mexico breaking ground on a project called SunZia. That is a 3.5 gigawatt wind project in eastern New Mexico and attendant 500 miles of transmission that will bring that energy to Phoenix and Los Angeles and other key cities on the west and in the southwest. That is, to finish the point, that is a bigger project than the Hoover Dam, to give you some scale.
Wow.
And that will be built with union labor, with good pay, with benefits, and good jobs. In addition to that, there are incentives to site projects in places that have often been left out and left behind, that have borne the brunt of fossil fuel and industrial pollution in energy communities, what we call traditional energy communities or disadvantaged communities. You get a 10 to 20% bonus credit for siting those projects in those communities so that no one is left behind and these investments reach every corner of the United States.
So strings attached to that money and also that you're making it place-based, community-level approach to making that clean energy. Make sure that even the local places that might be left behind won't be, right?
Exactly the strategy. The president, when he came into office, created a different initiative, but it works in tandem with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is called Justice 40, which was intended to ensure that in these environmental justice communities, 40% of the benefits of all relevant government programs went to the communities that have been racked and hit hard by heavy levels of pollution, again, both from the industrial sector and from and from the power sector. And so we're tracking that, we're managing towards that to ensure the benefit reaches the places that have really often been afterthoughts, left out, left behind, and have the highest incidences of pollution-related and environmental-related disease, including cancer, and we're trying to direct more federal aid into those communities, as well as trying to direct it to individual households through rebate programs and individual tax incentives to improve the performance of individual residences in those communities. We have a first-time ever tax credit for buying a used electric vehicle to try to get deployment of electric vehicles more into the the moderate and low income sectors of and communities in our cities. We have a massive program to build out charging, which tries to again anticipate and build that charging infrastructure in ways that can be taken advantage of. So I think it's there's a lot of moving parts in the Inflation Reduction Act and in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed a year earlier. But we're trying to ensure that the benefits are really felt at a social level, and that this is really is not just an environmental project, it's an economic project, and it's a social justice project.
Right.
And that's what the president campaigned on, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Which is what we're trying to do here in Europe also with this recovery funding after post-COVID and with the green transition. John, I wish I could ask more questions, but I think we have to wrap this. One point, though, is that this what we're talking about here in this panel is in this event is about the social pillar of EU policy, which was established 6 years ago, and we have a long way to go still. But that's something I think wouldn't actually fly through Congress in the U.S., would it? I think it's quite rare or unique for this to happen here, isn't it?
We have a different Congress than the one that passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Admittedly, yes, that's true.
With the Republicans taking over the House of Representatives and threatening a government shutdown. But I would say that on the Democratic Party side, I think what I've just described is, in essence, trying to learn from Europe and taking those kind of social goals and trying to Americanize them, if you will, trying to build them to the strategy of job creation, investment, deployment, innovation, but to do it with a conscious effort to lift up the work, to make sure that the fabric of society is, and the shared benefits of a clean energy future are felt across the country in rural and urban America. So I think the elements are the same. Maybe the strategies are slightly different and need to be adapted for, kind of for American political sensibilities.
Right. We're learning from each other. John, thank you so much. A big round of applause for John Podesta, Senior Advisor for Clean Energy, Innovation and Implementation at the White House. John, great pleasure to talk to you. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
All the best. Let us move on quickly because we are falling a bit behind. Let's move to the next panel. Let me call them up. Laszlo Andor, FEP's Secretary General and former EU Commissioner for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Ivailo Kalfin, Executive Director of Eurofound. That's the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions. That's an EU agency. And Marc Angel. Marc, please come on up. Marc is the European Parliament Vice President from Luxembourg, also on the Committees of Employment and Social Affairs, among others. And what we're talking about on this panel is where we go how far we've come. The next panel is where we go from here. How far we've come with this social pillar that has been, yes, 6 years. How far have we come? Maybe we could have come much further by now. But why don't we talk about, first of all, the achievements, the progressive achievements. Laszlo, if I can pass to you about you're also Bulgarian ex-deputy prime minister, minister of foreign affairs, labor and social policy, also MEP. You've been at every level of EU.
We joined forces.
Yes. Less, exactly. Right. Yes. That's what was put in here. Anyway, okay, there we go. Take it away. How far have we come, yes. Laszlo?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and asking this question to me. When I saw that 55 minutes were allocated to the progressive achievements, I thought times have changed because you really have an expectation that we discuss a long list, and I think this is justified. I'm kind of situated indeed to put things into perspective, and those of you who also remember can agree that about 10 years ago, when we were just emerging from the Eurozone crisis, it was all about doom and gloom when we discussed the European social model. Right. And then the concerns ever since 2008 and 2009 were that this social model is not only at risk, but we can say goodbye to all the achievements of Europe in this field. And when did the sentiment change? I think the sentiment fundamentally changed with the adoption of the Pillar of the Social Rights. And my successor, Nicola Schmidt's predecessor, Marianne Thyssen, was there to deliver it in Gothenburg, which was hosted by the socialist prime minister of the time, Le Pen. And indeed, this reversed the question entirely. Because until that time, if you wanted to promote something, like you wanted the youth guarantee, you wanted the portability of the pension, you had to justify it 3 times why you want it, right? So you always had to start all over again. Why this is an EU matter? Why this is something the EU should solve instead of the member states? And since the Pillar of the Social Rights, I think the checklist is there, and people actually look at it, what is not yet delivered? And then we have 20 principles, all of them very interesting, all of them somehow have a European dimension, and people say, okay, this has already been done, but what is the next one? What is the next one? And quite a few things that have happened were almost unthinkable 10 years ago. I give you an example, the question of the minimum wage. How was the minimum wage discussed 10, 15 years ago? That we put it on a wish list, which we call the employment package, that it would be fantastic if all EU countries would have a minimum wage one way or another. And then we started to pray, right? And then when subsequently I went to Berlin, then the young BDA people, representatives of the business community of Germany, they stood up and they said, this commissioner wants to destroy the German business model. And since then, what happened? Germany itself introduced a minimum wage, thanks to Andrea Nahles and the SPD joining the Grand Coalition at that time. And then they were actually pushing forward for a European coordination. And thanks to Agnes and other colleagues, now there is minimum wage coordination, which for my country, other countries in the region, your country, is immensely helpful, because it's not only giving orientation that the minimum wage should not lag behind the average wage too much, it also gives an encouragement to expand collective bargaining and related elements of the social dialogue. Let me give you another example, and I think Ivaile will also come in. What has happened at the time of the pandemic. Rolling out the instrument which we know, the SURE. 10 years before, when the Eurozone crisis was very, very rough, what did we do? We said, okay, let's try to reprogram the EU funds which are already there, right? This is also a good thing, because in a crisis, everything changes and you can provide people money for training with the Globalization Adjustment Fund. So there are some tools that had existed at that time. But what did the EU do in March 2020? in 2 weeks, not in 2 years, in 2 weeks, they said, okay, here is 100 billion euro, and you can invest it in job-saving schemes, shorten the working time, and this instrument, which is called SURE, was there, and it was actually saving a lot of jobs. Again, just because we are supposed to speak some numbers, in the first week of the pandemic, in the United States, how many people filed for unemployment benefit? 3 million in 1 week. In the European Union, for the whole course of 2020, the increase of unemployment was less than 3 million. Why? Because countries with EU support were implementing short-time work arrangements and other forms to mitigate the impact of the unemployment. Is this sufficient? Obviously not. Right. But this is a good example for inspiration that the EU can do things like this. If you ask me, I think we would need to follow up with genuine unemployment insurance or a coordination of those, because all different types of crises come. Not all crises in the future will be the same as the pandemic recession, so we shouldn't stop thinking about further possibilities of EU-wide safety nets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. So, yes, accomplishments. Let's talk a bit more with Ivailo about those accomplishments. Maybe we can hit on a couple of the other ones, maybe the child guarantee, for instance, the work-life balance. If you could hit on a couple of the accomplishments so far and what still needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to take part in the S&D Group event on the social union. Indeed, when we look a few years ago and we fast forward the time now, we kind of achieved some miracles. I mean, in terms of minimum wage, it was absolutely no issue to be discussed at European level. I mean, there was some discussions in the political family, but absolutely not in the European institutions. Now what we see, and I'll touch also what you have asked. For example, with the minimum wage, just to continue from what Laszlo just mentioned, we see in many countries already before the final transposition period an effort to align with this directive, and we have several countries also that did so. We have Cyprus that adopted legislation for the minimum wage, which didn't exist before. We have a general increase of the minimum wages and the decrease of the poverty or people at risk of poverty. But what we can see is that this is a longer-term trend. Because if we take the inflation, which started with the Russian war and aggression on Ukraine, I mean, this period since the inflation in last year, and Eurofound has this annual overview of the minimum wages, the inflation is higher than the minimum wages. I mean, it was not compensated by the minimum wages. But if you look at the last 10 years, the development over the last 10 years, the minimum wages practically saved many people from poverty. There are some interesting developments, though, if you look a little bit further on that. The increase of minimum wages means that more people receive them. If 10 years ago, about 5.5% of the labor were receiving minimum wages, in 2020, there were already 7.7%, which means you increase the cohort of people that are receiving and that are living on the minimum wage. Second, you see that there are some negative examples. For example, in terms of gender balance, you would see more women on the minimum wage than men. And it has an explanation with the types of jobs women are taking. So there are interesting developments with that. Having said that some countries have already adopted legislation on that, I have to say that there are no so good examples also in these countries because they ignored the social partners. I mean, it's very good, for example, in my country, I come from Bulgaria, to have this introduced in the law, but this was bypassing the social partners, which is absolutely not a good example for that. So we need to have this inclusion. So these are extremely positive developments. Child guarantee, it is a policy. There should be more things done on the child guarantee, but we already see the national plans in place. We see a coordinated effort to address the issue with child poverty. and we have to know that more than 20% of the children in Europe are at risk of poverty. So that is something which is extremely important. EU Fund, by the way, starts at the request of the Parliament now a research on this particular issue. So in a few months' time, we would be able to give you some particular information. Few words finally on this work-life balance. I mean, this is a very broad topic, but I would focus mostly on this movement to teleworking and new types of work. Actually, we are living in a very interesting period of time now. I mean, the world is changing. The world of work is changing tremendously fast. It's going to get to some equilibrium in some time, but it is not there yet. So changes are happening very fast, very much boosted by the pandemic also. So what we see now, this is a huge increase of remote working, teleworking, hybrid working, new forms of work like the platform work, etc., etc. They have plenty of benefits, but at the same time they have risks related to psychosocial risks, risks with overtime, increased stress, less socialization, less innovations in some company. For the platform workers, there are plenty of things. I mean, in this house, I wouldn't speak because the Parliament, especially the Socialist Group, is very active about platform workers, but there are plenty of issues to be solved there. But these developments are happening. So it's very important, exactly at the time when they're happening, before getting to an equilibrium, to intervene with policies. And I'm very happy that the Parliament is really very active in setting these policies on platform work, on right to disconnect, and here the social partners are extremely involved, and the arrangements around telework.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ivailo. Now, Mark, what about these accomplishments? But there remains a lot to be done. Maybe you can give a bit of the yin and yang. And then also, what do you expect, what would you hope to hear from that State of the Union speech next week on the social pillar?
Chris, thank you very much for this interesting question. But before I answer that question, I would like to make a remark. Normally, I would not sit on an all-male panel, but I'm here today to replace Gabi Bischoff, our good colleague, who is together with Agnes Jungerius, the champions, and they are motivating all the S&D members in the Employment Committee to really push this social dimension. So I said I made an exception to that today, to my principle. Second of all, the State of the Union is a very important debate. And last year, our main critic was that Ursula von der Leyen concentrated on, she talked an hour for resilient SMEs, resilient economy, and she forgot to talk about the resilient people that are able to pay their bills at the end of the month, people who are suffering in this multiple crisis, who are suffering, who are afraid of the dual transition we ahead. And I expect next week that Ursula von der Leyen really praises the work which has been done by Commissioner Nicola Schmid, by also our group. I mean, that was also a condition when we voted her as a Commission President, that the social dimension, that the European Pillar of Social Rights that Jean-Claude Juncker brought on the table, but it was a paper at that time, and now Nicola Schmid turned it into an action plan, and we are pushing this action plan and into concrete actions, the minimum wages directive, the pay transparency directive, and we work very hard here. We worked on reports on democracy at work. We worked on reforming the European Works Council to strengthen trade unions, and we also work on asbestos and safety and health is very important for us, and we bring all these aspects. We all bring this forward, but there is things that have to continue, and I'm at 4 o'clock. I have to go back to Luxembourg. We're having elections in 1 month there, and the problem which concerns the citizens the most is the housing crisis. We have the highest minimum wage in Luxembourg in the European Union, but we are also having the highest number of people in work poverty, or a quite high percentage of people in work poverty, especially single parents, women, and this is a huge problem. And therefore, I'm also very happy that in this Parliament, in the Employment Committee, we worked on homelessness and we worked on affordable houses, and we voted 2 reports, and we called that there should be changes. For example, on the homelessness, we call on the principle of housing first. It is very successful in Finland and in other countries, and I think this is something Mrs. von der Leyen should not forget to talk about that. Also, the affordable housing. Our demand as SND Group was that the housing affordability, this principle, must be included in the European semester and also in the national reform programs, because everybody in this European Union deserves a place that he or she can call a home, and therefore we also have to continue working on this, even though it's not a pure European competence, but Europe can give incentives, and also Europe needs to finance this. And we had the debate with the Spanish minister before on changing on own resources and the fiscal rules, etc. This has to go hand in hand. We cannot just promise things and not finance them at the end. So I think we have to strengthen this social dimension. A lot has been done. Thank you to Commissioner Nicola Schmid and to all our colleagues here who helped pushing this. We have things to finish. We have the platform directive where Elisabetta Gualmini did a fantastic report, and we got almost everything in that the Commission had in, and we made it even better, the proposal. Now we have to have a fight in the institutional trilogues that we keep as much as possible, and this the directive must be a success. When it comes to social, you know, I'm wearing today this pin of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think this is a fantastic agenda because it's a social democrat agenda. It combines what the Spanish minister said before. It combines these 3 dimensions. It combines the economic dimension, the environmental dimension, but also the social dimension. And this agenda has a bit been hijacked by the Greens, and people think when they hear the word sustainable, it's just about green. No, it's about social and economy, and also about environment. And in the transitions we are in, this should be also our guiding principles. And I'm very happy that FAPS, the Progressive Society, and many of us are working into this direction. And if we continue this in this path, I think we can achieve even more. We should not sit there and say, good, we did this is all, but we have to continue, because otherwise the far right is taking over. And I'm very happy that in Spain now the elections is the first elections in a long row where the far right has lost a lot of weight, a lot of votes. And this is not just, it didn't happen like that. It happened because the Spanish government did social policy. The Spanish government was a feminist government, didn't divide the people over anti-gender policies, etc. And this is the path we have to continue in the next years. So I'm optimistic, and this dark picture, which a few are drawing of the next European Parliament having so many people from the far right, no, this is not going to happen. Social policies, social politics, we have to say that we are the ones who care about the people, because if you analyze the results of the votes of the far right in this parliament when it comes to the European Workers' Council, minimum wage, etc., they're always on the side with the big money, with the big industry, and they're not on the side of the people who work every day in our continent. And this is something we have to really get the narrative that people in the member states understand it, because in the member states, these parties, people believe them and they think they are the ones who are going to save them. They are the ones who are not on their side. We are on their side, and this is the message we have to pass over for the next European elections. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you very much. We've got time for a couple of questions at this point, and I'd like to invite anyone with a question about that. I mean, there are 20 principles. I'm looking at this. There are 20 principles in this social pillar. And there are some, there are only so many we can talk about, but education, training, lifelong learning, gender equality, equal opportunities, active support to employment, and so forth. There are many things that need to be addressed. And how far have we come there? Are there any questions about the accomplishments? Yes.
Yeah, so this is Tim from the European Federation for Social, Public and Cooperative Housing, Housing Europe. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for the interesting input, and particularly Mark Angel for the mention of housing, which is, of course, an issue in many countries in Europe. Maybe just to open the floor for the panel, what do you think Europe or the EU can do to make housing more accessible, affordable and sustainable in Europe beyond what is being done now? Thank you.
Who would like to take that first? You don't all have to, it's just maybe one of you. Right.
Maybe, of course, all social policies, if you have more purchasing power, you have also more power to pay a decent housing, be it a rent or buying a house. So working on keeping salaries going in the same pace as the inflation, and in the moment there is a big difference. The inflation is much higher than how salaries go up. So doing this policy to really make people who work, that they see that is what they work, it's worse to work, and not make those people who just where the money works, they are the ones who profit from everything. So this is one thing. Then, as I said, the proposals which we had, which the S&D put it in these 2 reports already. And then also we are working in, there will be a directive on short-term rental directive. I think this is also very important. A lot of speculation is done with housing. In a lot of cities, the city centers become tourist attractions, and all the housing people are driven pushed out of the cities, because you make more money with a little apartment if you put it on Airbnb. And I just read today that in New York now they are attacking this problem because they're having a big issue with it. And I think this is also a very concrete measure where Europe has where we have the power. As I said before, national policy is very important in housing policy, and therefore we call also that on the national reform plans this issue of housing has to be really underlined. So we can do something. We should not say, oh, this is not, the treaty doesn't give us, and then lay back and say this is only national. Together with our member states, we have to do that.
Great. Laszlo, please.
Yes, just to add a minimal point, indeed, it's also a matter of the social investment. And some of the EU funds can indeed go to this direction, but it needs to be regulated in a way that it overcomes this trade-off, which is sometimes assumed that it's either clean or affordable. And then if we can kind of connect the two and ensure that the housing developments become affordable and clean at the same time, then we did something, plus something which again comes back from the historic memory, that the biggest housing crisis, when homelessness skyrocketed in a few cases like Spain and Ireland at the time of the great financial crisis. Why was it happening? Because of the lax financial regulation and the fact that people could lose their homes even if they didn't anymore have no, they remained with the debt even if they lost the home, which was mortgaged before, right? So to outlaw such practices, that you lose the asset whilst still remain with the debt, would be a big step forward, because it would force the banking system to be more prudent.
Are there any other questions before we get some feedback from Ivailo? Any other questions over here? Yes, 1 sec. Ivailo, you have a quick thing to say, and then we'll go with the question.
Yeah, just to point your attention, maybe you have seen it. Eurofound recently published a report about housing across Europe. And there is a set of different practices that are used at national level. Some of them are very interesting, could be eventually used at national, at European level. However, you need to take into consideration the national characteristic. To give you an example, in Ireland, for example, 93% of the people live or prefer living in houses, while in Spain, 70% live in apartments. And much less in houses. So when you speak about tackling the housing problem, you have to take into consideration also national characteristics. But I agree, I mean, the banking sector now with the increasing inflation and interest rates, that becomes a huge problem for mortgage payers, etc.
Absolutely. Yes, final question. We have 5 minutes left, so go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Hello everyone, it's Elspeth here from Industrial Europe. So we are the Trade Union Confederation representing workers in industry and manufacturing, including our Ukrainian affiliates. It's really, really good to hear from you today. The panel is talking about progressive wins. And we've heard a little bit about the term just transition, but we've not dived into it yet. So just transition, everyone probably knows, is a trade union term. It's about the green and digital transition and how we can make it fair for workers as well as communities in different industries. So how would you say the EU has done so far in terms of just transition? What have been the wins and what still needs to be done? Because again, world of work is changing. It'll be on voters' minds. What can we do to ensure that no one's left behind? Thanks.
That's worth a whole conference, but would somebody like to answer that in 2 minutes? Who would like to take that?
Okay. You're right. First of all, IndustriALL, you're doing a great work, and our former colleague, MEP from the UK, Jude Curtin-Darling, is very active too, and she sells very well the good work you do to us. And I think what you do is your work is very valuable, because you are not having a narrative of fear towards the workers in industry. You're having a positive narrative, and the European Union has to come back to this positive narrative, which is much more important. And we see it now, our colleagues from EPP backtracking from the Green Deal and making this narrative of fear. This is not good. So your narrative is the right one, and I can only invite the PSE to really read your documents, and that we find a lot what you preach in our next manifesto for the European elections. The Parliament, maybe we haven't done, the European Union so far hasn't done enough, I think, in this prospect, because the Just Transition Fund, we were fighting, of course, for having more money in this fund, but we are always the ones who remind, and we try when we work on legislative files and also on reports to get this in. And also our fight to get the social progress protocol into the treaty if ever we have this convention, and I hope we will have this convention. This will also help, and this will also help to underline the importance of the social dimension, to have also more fund, and to give more prominence and importance to the social dimension when it comes to these two transitions, these two dual transitions. They have to be just and fair. And believe us, we are the ones who really fight very hard that the Green Deal will have a red heart. And it's not only a slogan, but we are working hard on it, and some of the achievements are already going in the right direction. But the next panel is a very interesting panel where they talk about what else we have to do. I hope we will have a directive. I don't want to take the words for what. Can I say two things what I forgot to say before?
Please.
Before, I had a message to our Ukrainian friends, and also, since I replaced Gabi here, be assured that we are watching what happens in Ukraine also on the social front, and that we are watching what the Chicago Boys, the American Chamber of Commerce, and others are trying to destroy already the existing labor law you have. And you have people like Gabi, Agnes, and ETUC. Together with ETUC, we are very attentive to that. And this political group doesn't leave you alone in that fight, and count on us. This was a message, I think, which Gabi would have given to you and which I wanted to give to you. And then something John Podesta said was very interesting, and I sat next to Agnes, and then she showed me a study of ETUC on comparing the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, to what we have here in Europe, which came from a liberal commissioner, the EU Green Deal Industrial Plan. There I must say, yes, sometimes we can also learn. John Podesta said we can learn from you, but we can learn on this, because it is proven that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is an incentive to pay decent wages, firstly. Secondly, it stops the CEOs pocketing, that they pocket all the profits. And thirdly, I hope I can read my writing here, it helps, yes, it is something very important also, it helps former industrial areas. And this is very important too, because this is something where the far right plays with, in industrial areas where they say work will be lost, the Green Deal destroys everything. So I think we can also learn from the Americans on this point of view.
Great. Mark, thank you very much. Mark, thanks to Mark and to Laszlo and to Ivailo. A big hand to all three. Thank you. Thank you. you guys. And it's interesting that we are talking about just transition when Madame Teresa Rivera is walking in, third Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Change. I might just point out, as a journalist, that I saw that it's quite interesting how she helped to negotiate a more just transition for the coal mining industry in Spain based on a €250 million investment to make that just transition so that there is a future for those in the coal industry to make that transition to a cleaner source of energy. So with that, Teresa, I would like, Madam Minister, I would like to invite you up, please. So I pass you the floor. I think it's great to hear from you about this transition, how it's working in Spain, and how we can learn from that across Europe.
Okay, thank you so much. And with this very focused introduction, I would also make comments on this because I think that yes, it is a complicated challenge, but it is very, very important to succeed on how we ensure that the transformation of the economy, the understanding of how to facilitate a future for the society does also deal with the transitional impacts, but also the fairness and the equity in this transformation if we want to avoid the fear and the opposition to change. Because no matter what it happens, things have changed, and things will change even more rapidly than what it has been up to now. So taking care of people and facilitating a good context to ensure that this goes in a smooth and fair manner is part of what I would say our obligation as people that do stick to a strong conviction of fairness and social equity. And it has been probably one of the most interesting things that we have done during these years in government, how we have facilitated the phase out of coal and how we have facilitated this to happen in a way that we pay attention to the impact on the ground and on the people. It doesn't mean that everything is finished. It doesn't mean that there are not still challenges ahead. But in fact, as someone asked me, you have made an industrial transformation and there have been no strikes, there have been no conflict on the street. So how you managed to do so? There are some comments, previous comments that I think that could be important. The first of them is that coal was still important in terms of power production. It was not so important because the phasing out of coal mining started a long time ago. But the second thing which was very important is that dealing with this issue is not just thinking about the rationality of the economic parameters that are behind. Because in fact, coal regions do represent the sentiment of the people that do live in that region, the core activities beyond the coal mining, because people organize their jobs and their services and their demands around this very relevant activity in that region, but also sentiments of solidarity built along decades. So how people did take care of each other. So there is a kind of legend and sentiment that we need to respect and that we need to deal with if we want to succeed. The proposal, and I think that this was very important, was to say, okay, things have changed. Now we know that there are many things that will have to happen in a different manner, but we want to pay respect and to express that we collectively as society want to pay respect to what all of this has meant for decades and among generations in order to build prosperity in our country. And this means that the institutions could be feeding with possibilities and with a proper and respectful discussion how to build jointly the future. And we are in the middle of this transformation. But we started before this Just Transition Fund was even conceived, and the state of play right now is much more promising than what it used to be. And I think that this connects to what you have been discussing during this afternoon, how to build progress with European values and what are the most relevant elements to take into consideration, not only for the discussion and the presentation of the President of the Commission on the State of the Union next week, but also what we should be expecting and what is the role to play for the progressives in the next mandate, for the next Commission, how we prepare ourselves for the elections in May and what we want to be in Europe, what we want to be as Europeans, and what we want to keep on contributing for in the time to come. I would say that very largely thanks to a quite clear and committed approach from this group since the very beginning of the mandate of the new Commission, this has been a spectacular time for Europe, full of unexpected challenges, full of challenges that had already been described by the previous Commission, but the type of response to deal with any of these challenges has tended to be green and socially committed. And this was because that was the type of understanding coming from this group on why it was worth it to build a prosperous Europe around these values. I think that we could go through a long list of files and achievements during these years. Even the understanding on how to react to face the crisis, the COVID crisis, does match with this description. But my main points this afternoon could not be so much on the achievements, because I think that we could go providing each of us a singular, concrete element to the list, and that could be fantastic, and that could be very reassuring, but on the need to keep on going, and on the importance to stick to these ideas, to these principles, to these goals, and to be committed and to be flexible and sound to manage the transformation that we are going through. I think that the first threat that we are already witnessing is this apparent discussion that comes back again, brought by some of your colleagues in the Parliament, by some of other political families in the national agendas, on whether there could be social impacts because of the climate action, whether there could be economic negative impacts because of the climate action. And this is pretty dangerous, because this goes to feed the fear to policy commitment, to political climate response. But in fact, not taking action could mean a very unfair and a very harmful reaction coming from people, and consequence that could bring us into a very difficult situation, not only as human beings, but as Europeans, or even to keep the peace in the world. So I think that it is very important not to waste time to discuss the principles, the major reference and the major data, but to get into the concrete and pragmatic approach on how we can handle a transformation that breaks inertia and that still creates, of course, concerns on people that see that things do change too fast, and not always with a clear certainty on how they could be empowered to react to this change. So this could be, according to my own reading, a very relevant moment for Europe. What happens in the next elections in May, how we ensure that other political forces that apparently were pro-European and moderated forces do stay in the current consensus or do go beyond the current consensus just because of the very short-term, political wins that they may have going along the populism and going along some demagogic approaches that we are already witnessing and experiencing. I think that it is clear that we need to build in this structural transformation that has been a must for the climate reasons, and I think that this means a few very relevant primary question marks to you all. We have gone through this social democratic contribution both from the European Parliament and the Member States in this period. And now we know that this is a race against time. Things are accelerating, and we need to provide pragmatic approaches and pragmatic responses that are socially grounded. It is impossible to make the changes without the social support. It is impossible to get the support of people without experiencing the benefits of the changes. So we need to invest in creating the conditions to experience the benefits of the changes. This is not social justice, it is employment, it is education, it is skilling and reskilling, it is investing in infrastructure, it is tax policies, it is so many other things. The question connects back to what type of conversation we keep with, not only with people, but with the business community, and how we ensure that the business community go along the lines when making their own decisions of new investments, on producing in a different manner, on using materials, raw materials or equipments in a different way. This afternoon, if I have properly understood, you had some inputs coming from John Podesta.
Yes.
And this is very interesting. This is very interesting, and according to my own reading, this has an impact both in our domestic discussion, but also in the international arena. Because for a long time, and several times along the years, we have been able to count on the Americans, and we have been able not to count, or we have not been able to count on the Americans, and we have been forced to manage on our own. So I think it is very important to ensure that we can count on the Americans for this deep transformation that should happen worldwide. And I think that the approach that the Americans have taken on this climate and energy policies is quite interesting and quite American. We want to do the revolution, and we're going to provide the right framework, and this is going to be business-oriented, and this is going to be very pragmatic, and there could be so many things, which is fantastic, great. But I have two question marks for ourselves, because it's true that if there are many, wealthy countries investing in the required responses, it could be easier. The question is where we can find fields where we can go together, how we can be sure that we keep our own identity and our own capacities, and how we can ensure that we remain reliable for the rest of the world. Because we have this feeling, the Americans are great people. When the great people are in power, the Americans become a nightmare where there are the wrong people in power. But there are many other people in the world that think in a similar way. So it is very tricky, very complicated, and very risky to see we go with the Americans. We need to build a common agenda with our friends in the United States. But we need to keep our role as bridge builders with many other countries in the world that need to see the European Union as a trustful partner for the transformation of their own demands, which is not always easy, and it is probably one of the most compelling challenges right now. The rest of the world thinking how you Europeans manage to cope with your own crisis. Suddenly you got money, we don't know from where, but we have our own crisis, we don't feel the solidarity, and in addition, we feel you are very much aligned with the Americans. So we need to be sure how we can keep this double approach and to keep this role of bridge builders. The other very important thing in terms of geopolitics and the discussions for the time to come is the multilateralism and how we can ensure that the conversations and the pressures and the ambitions coming from the different parts of the world do not deviate ourselves from our own capacities to keep on building on the United Nations system and the multilateralism as the means, as the instruments to keep peace and to keep a constructive progress for all. And I say this because this is also something that is floating on the air. The BRICS being enlarged, it's not that they have a common approach on every single thing, but they think that they have the right to get a different governance in the Bretton Woods institutions, in the financial system and the development and the finance of development, in the United Nations Council of Security, and that there is an underrepresentation according to their own expectations and their own potentials and their share of the power of the world. This is one agenda that is not going to be solved right now, but this is something that we need to bear in mind. And in parallel, we have the rest of the developing world thinking, what about us? Where are we and how we can build things differently? Right now, we have gone through this African Climate Summit, and still we see how there are progressive countries willing to build partnerships so to ensure that they can develop their own capacities and that they can provide the right responses to their peoples. And we also feel that there is a pressure coming from third countries saying, okay, we will go back to this idea of trading materials against whatever, but it is against influence also in the world and not necessarily on a balance approach. And there is this underground feeling of, well, we have enough about the Europeans, and we don't know if we can trust or not Europeans. And I think that it is very important, again, to be sure that we develop the tools to ensure that these partnerships can be built. And in this context, I guess that there are some discussions ongoing that could be very helpful. We know that we need to decarbonize. We know that we need to produce and consume in a different manner. We know that this is going to change the existing trends and the existing relative powers. We have experienced a huge crisis, not only because of the COVID, but because of the Ukrainian invasion. And we have been able to manage the response in a very effective, solidary, and flexible manner. So this has become an additional reason why we need to decarbonize our economy, and we need to lower the dependence coming from Russia. This is fantastic. We are learning to do things in a different manner. We cannot build other type of dependencies. So we talk about strategic autonomy. And when we talk about the strategic autonomy, there are many people out there thinking, what does this mean? Are you going to come for my raw materials and I will sell my raw materials without taking the full opportunity to build development at home? I'm simplifying the comment just to point out that this could provide, again, a new opportunity, a new occasion for co-development. And there are many countries that could benefit from an increased engagement from the European institutions and the European member states on this understanding of values and development. And my final comment is that I still perceive a discussion that is coming up and up on whether we will manage to use energy and climate policies as the main driver to build more Europe, to build more progress, and to introduce social opportunities for all, or it will become a reason why we come back to national and domestic interest, to national and domestic industrial policies, to national understanding on social measures. So that's the additional point that we need to take into consideration. In the coming days, you will be having a hearing with Maroš Šefčovič. You know him very well.
Yep.
I think that it's good to be able to count on his capacities and skills to build alliance and to think beyond the national, the domestic interests on how we can build these conversations with citizens, with business, but as I said, not to get stick and to get hostage, by the national vested interest, but to use it as an opportunity to build more Europe.
So that's what we hope to hear next week from von der Leyen. Thank you, Teresa Ribera. Thank you very much. Interesting that you're handling not only ecological transition, but also demographic challenge, which is a whole nother conference in itself.
Yes.
So, but thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's move to the next panel, the looking ahead to the road ahead. And I'll call up the panelist, Esther Lynch, who we have already seen. Esther, welcome back. The European Trade Union Confederation General Secretary, Agnes Jongerius, S&D Group Coordinator on the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, who's on her way. Andrew Watt, Head of Unit of the European Economic Policy at Macroeconomic Policy Institute, MK, at the Hans Böckler Foundation. Laura de Bonfils, President of the Social Platform. Welcome, Laura. And Katarina Nanu, Head of Domestic Advocacy and Partnerships at Save the Children EU. Welcome. So we have 5 speakers and not a lot of time, so we're going to try to stay on time. But Esther, let's start with you. And of course, there are many things to talk about, including what we heard about Ukraine. Hope you can wrap that together and what the expectations are looking ahead, the road ahead for the European Union and for Ukraine as far as social policy.
Thanks. Good to be back working with everybody. Thinking about our holidays and about holidays being a particular moment of inequality, though. Our research showed us over the summer was that many people on minimum wages couldn't afford even one day of a holiday with their children. And now that their children are back at school, they're struggling to afford books and pencils and bags and uniforms. And I want to begin by thanking everybody here for the work that you did with us and we did with you and our massive success, which was the minimum wage directive, because that is going to put real money in the pockets of those families who are struggling. And more importantly, is going to make sure that they can join a union without fear and collectively bargain. And what we need to do now is to deliver the one extra bit that's still missing. And the bit that's still missing is the type of thing that President Biden has done that we heard about, which is to make sure that all public money, whether it's public procurement, whether it's investment, no matter what that money is, it comes with a string attached. And the string attached has to be good jobs. jobs covered by a collective agreement, the type of jobs that you can afford to put a roof over their head, food on the table, and the type of life of dignity that involves a holiday, that involves being able to afford that when your kids go back to school, that they can compete, that they can have the social capital that all the other kids have as well. So I think that that's the first thing that we're hoping to hear from, is strong social conditionalities, that public procurement, and we need to get that for definite and for real in the coming period. We've said to President Ursula von der Leyen that in her State of the Union address, she needs to recognise that Europe has a social justice emergency, that not everybody is doing okay, and that she needs to come forward with proposals, with ideas, and to reinforce that there will be measures to deal with that. And the big concern that we have is that at the same time as that discussion is happening, we have a parallel discussion in the Parliament, which is on the new rules for economic governance. And if the new rules for economic governance are such that no member state can afford anything, whether it's housing, hospitals, schools, roads, whatever it is, well, then all the other conversations we're having are going to be put through a shredder by the time we finished having them. So I think that's the second big struggle that we have, is to recognise that we can't go back to Barroso. We don't want some small tweaks. What we want is economic governance rules that make sure that the type of investment, whether it's for the just transition, industrial policy, or for the type of social services that are absolutely essentially needed, not just from a social justice argument, but also for a competitiveness argument. You know, companies need to also get real and join us in this discussion. That if the workers can't afford to live there, can't afford to travel to work, and there's no schools and hospitals, then you're not going to find people to work for you. So we need to have the employers join us on our side of the table and not only be looking for competitiveness for individual companies. And I invite them to that discussion and to support the family here in looking for that. And then finally, because I don't have a lot of time, is to say that who you vote for matters, and that's going to be the trade union message. All politicians are not the same, all policies are not the same, all analysis is not the same. So we're very happy that this family has supported us so that on the 15th of November, we can come back with our call for commitments for the next European election. Just want to say to the colleagues in Ukraine, the reason myself and Agnes want to come and have the discussion with you, because it is absolutely essential that the trade unions are recognised as legitimate democratic organisations that must be, not as a presence, but as a fundamental pillar of democracy involved in the decisions that are being made, both on what the money needs to be spent on, but also how it needs to be spent. So you can just want to give that commitment that we're absolutely going to go to Ukraine and to reinforce the social dialogue message. And the social dialogue messages where you get better outcomes. The outcomes stick better when trade unions have been involved in the discussions. Thank you.
Martial law notwithstanding, right? In any case, I thought I might just point out about Esther is that I see in your bio that you worked in a microchip factory. I did. And you were living on low wages, so you know how that is. You can relate, right?
In fairness, most folks here know that I spent a lot of time on minimum wage. The hardest work I ever did was when I was a minimum wage worker. Never worked harder in my life. Hardest. And but what most people don't know is I was also homeless. I've been street homeless in my life. And I could get upset even now just thinking about that. And I know how hard it is just to get that ladder, to get yourself back in. So I was particularly impressed with Mark Engel's contribution and the importance of us all recognizing that it's very hard to do anything. It's very hard to go to work, very hard to have a job, very hard to have friends, a family, very hard to have hope in your own self when you don't have a home. So, yeah, so I think the social fabric, I think the piece, that missing piece is a responsibility for all of us. The trade unions want to work with those groups advocating on homelessness. We want to be there. We see that children do well when the wage earner in the family does well. Children do well when they have a stable home to go to. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, as I've often said, that the idea that cleaning work or care work is low skilled or no skills is ridiculous, and that was why I'm so proud of the work that we did as well for the Gender Pay Transparency Directive that also guarantees that unions can go in and negotiate for the value of work that carers and cleaners are doing, that we can put on the table that the only reason that work has been so undervalued is because it's predominantly done by women, and that this new piece of legislation at EU level will also help us to have the economic justice that those women workers deserve too.
I mean, all those points that you made were in that social pillar that we saw since 2017. And how far, yeah, there we go. And how far have we come? Well, we still have a long way to go. And we need to talk now to Agnes Jongerius, S&D Group Coordinator in the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. And I guess, you know, two questions. You see challenges ahead, and what would you like to hear from that State of the Union speech next week?
I see challenges ahead indeed, because now I think it's clear for the whole debate already. Some people are doing extremely well. Some people are doing quite okay. But too many people are not doing okay and are getting more and more annoyed by, let's say, the story, for instance, my Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, told for 12 years on a row, let's grow the pie, because if the pie is growing, then everyone gets a bigger piece of the pie, as if this is logic. And luckily, we also have elections in the Netherlands because Mark Rutte stepped down. And I'm quite optimistic that our political family, under the leadership of Frans Timmermans, can come out of these elections as the winners, because we really need a different story. This story of, let's say, let's just focus on the economy is simply not enough. And Esther mentioned the name of Barroso. Before coming to the European Parliament, I was part of the Dutch trade union movement, and I do remember Barroso saying in one of his last meetings, I was there in the European Trade Union Confederation, sorry, I'm the Commission President, I'm responsible for 3 babies, the economy, the social, and the environment, but if the economy is ill, sorry, I have to neglect both other children, and that is indeed what he has done. And yes, Laszlo, you're completely right. The business community was dictating what kind of policies came out of there. And I must say, European Business Confederation at the moment are still living in the Barroso years. So I worked on the Posting of Workers Directive in the previous mandate. I worked on the Minimum Wage Directive in this mandate, and they just simply said, we don't want this. No, let's say, constructive contribution from their side at all. And yes, von der Leyen put proposals on the table because we twisted her arm. We said we need this. And the business community thought if we just keep saying no, then the proposals will not show up. But on these 2 promises, on the minimum wage and on the gender pay gap, she kept their promises. But I think we need to push for indeed much more, because this booklet is interesting. I always carry it in my purse.
And that booklet, you want to connect that with the digital and green transition, right? That's one of those challenges you got.
Absolutely, because you cannot say on the one hand, this is important, this is what every European is entitled to, and then keep spending your money, keep attributing subsidies, as if this booklet is not there. And to be open, yes, we made some progress in the recovery plan, but to be also open, the environmental conditions are much stronger than the social conditions, and now it's time to get even, and to get even in subsidies, so in policies, social conditionalities, in the fiscal and economic rules. And I expect von der Leyen to indeed realize that this booklet is there, that it has the signature of her predecessor. Yes. So she has to keep pushing for that. I also would like to hear, let's say, the promise about a ban on unpaid internship, because I think this is something we can do for our young people in the run-up to the election. I hope we can finish the Platform Work Directive on time, and this really needs some arm twisting from Ursula von der Leyen to some of the governments in the European Council. So I expect some help for her. And lastly, I'd like to mention, perhaps sorry to spoil the positive atmosphere in the room, but I think after we all noticed what has happened with the Spanish football team, if we saw what has happened with the players, I think we should realize this kind of behavior is not only encountered by football teams, and I really like the fact that there is a lot of support of the football community, but it's happening to women in quite a lot of workplaces. So sexual aggression at the workplace, I think this could be an important contribution from the first female president of the European Commission to women in Europe.
He told her to sit on the couch. Do you remember when she
Yeah, I know the story about her being redirected to the couch. So I think she knows what sexual aggression is. But I think I would like to have support for preventing sexual harassment at the workplace from her.
And just to mention that gender equality is number 2.
Absolutely, yeah.
Number 2 on the
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's move on.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Andrew Watt, head of a unit, European Economic Policy at the Macroeconomic Policy Institute, MMK. That's part of the Hans Böckler Foundation in Germany. Andrew, you're going to give us more of a macro approach of how we try to address those issues in that pamphlet, that pillar, European pillar. How do we do it on a macro level?
Right, so thanks very much for...
You've got some slides here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I have a couple of slides. Can you see? Yeah, you have them up there. Let me take this down for a second. I thought to put my speaking notes on in slide form. So thanks very much for inviting me. Yes, so I was asked to talk a little bit about the relationship between economic policy and social outcomes. Can you advance the slides? So I want to do 3 things. One is to talk a little bit about what I think are some fundamental issues to sort of clear the ground a bit. Then I want to look at economic governance, which Esther mentioned, and the IRA and industrial policy, which was discussed a bit in the previous panel. So the first thing, the fundamental things I want to say, they may initially sound a little bit different from what Agnes just said, although I don't think they are. What I hear a lot in the progressive community is this idea of a balance between the economic and the social, and there's a bit of a sort of implication in there that the economics is the job of the centre right, right, the liberals and the conservatives, and our job is the social, right, and that I think is indeed a bit problematic. So this may sound a little bit Barroso-like, but it's not. I think you do need a strong. I mean, I think he and the other liberals, they do have a point. You need or I have a sort of more social democratic line on this. You do need a strong economy to get good social outcomes, because, as Esther surely knows, and all trade unions know, if you have a lot of surplus labour, if you have high unemployment, you lack the organisational power to push through positive outcomes, right? So in that sense, I think there is indeed a sort of prior for having a strong economy. What the liberals, of course, get totally wrong is how to achieve that, right? And there, I think Barroso and all those in that tradition are totally wrong, including the current crop of liberal politicians. And I think it's the job of the centre left, of progressives, also people close to the union movement. Now, in case it's not known, the Hans Böckler Foundation is close to the German trade union movement. I think we, or the centre left, needs to have a strong message that we are the ones who are competent on economic policy, right? But it's not about just creating markets and about incentives. It's about indeed having strong but also sustainable growth, driven largely by public investment, that if you limit inequalities and promote social cohesion and protection, that's also good for not just social outcomes, but also for the economy. You need strong and intense regulation of the economy, otherwise you get a lot of bad outcomes. And you need social partnership to drive that. Next slide, please. So I tried to put this into a little graph here actually, to be frank with you, on the train here. So it's fairly simple. But if you think of these three areas, the economy, the social, and P for politics, right? You can see how you can have a sort of positive feedback between these areas in very simple terms. If you have a strong economy, you have more scope for redistribution because you have more fiscal resources. You have less need for, less demands on the public purse because, for example, unemployment is lower. You have the ability to finance public investment. And you have stronger workers' voice because you have a low unemployment. This feeds into the good social outcomes. That has positive economic implications, though, as well, because people are healthier, people are more productive. You have higher levels of social trust. People are willing to accept change, right? People will resist change if they're worried about becoming unemployed. They're more open to change on things like green transition, if they're confident there's another job for them down the road. And this then feeds in, I think, to positive political outcomes. Various panelists in the previous panel talked about the extreme right, which is very worrying, and people were saying how great it is that things aren't so bad in Spain. Well, in Germany, now the second party in the polls is the AfD, right? Is the extreme right, after the Conservatives, right? So in the biggest member state in Europe, right? So this is a big concern. And as this is a very simple little graph, but I mean, there's actually a lot of economic and also sociological research which shows that if you invest in these, whatever you want to call them, disadvantaged, left-behind communities, as the American colleague, Mr. Podesta, was saying in the US, you actually weaken the extreme right and increase trust in the centrist parties. And that, in turn, would be my argument, is also good for economic performance. So that's a little way to maybe think about how I think on the centre-left we should maybe think about how these things hang together. So next slide. So now I want to focus on two things. I mean, I think I don't need to belabor these points here. In the short term, we have these challenges from high inflation. Warning, I think, a serious risk of recession just down the road. If we combine the high interest rates now that the European Central Bank is imposing to bring down inflation, if on top of that we get austerity policies, which I think is unfortunately likely, then we're at risk indeed of weakening the job market. towards the end of this year and in the coming year. And in the medium term, we have all these issues here that we've been discussing also in the panels, which I won't then go into, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what to do about them, right? And the background to this is the, you know, on the political side is the increased social tensions we've seen, distributional conflicts, of course, which you always get when you have high inflation, and the rise of the far right. So let me turn to the two policy issues that I want to talk about. One is macroeconomic policy and the concern that we won't be able to address these issues because our economic governance regime is still not fit for purpose. And the second issue is on the industrial policy side, the fear that unlike the Americans, unlike the colleague I thought very ably and very well explained to us, you know, that we won't be able to do that sort of thing in Europe. Next slide, please. So what's to be said about economic governance? Well, I was very glad to hear that Esther and the ETUC are putting this very much front and center, because I think it's absolutely critical. You know, I could put it very bluntly. If we have a Maastricht economic governance regime, we can't achieve social Europe. I will put it like that, right? And what happened in my view is the Commission came out with what I think were actually very good proposals. I mean, given the constraints that the Commission is under, the original proposals the Commission made were very good. Country by country assessment, focus on some more technical issues here, focusing on expenditure rather than on the structural balance. Not a full golden rule, but a privileging of public investment in a sort of dialogue with member states, and an integration, which I think is long overdue, of the fiscal rules and the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. Again, a slightly more technical issue. But what we've seen since then, as I'm sure many in the room know, is a sort of fight back from the centre right, from the liberal centre right side. And I mean, I don't know what the view here is in the room. Some of you are much closer to this probably than I am. But because we shouldn't forget that the default is that we go back to the old rules, right? So I see a certain danger there, that the Liberals are in a strong position indeed, because if nothing is agreed, then we're going to end up with the old rules, right? So I fear that there could be a further weakening of what the Commission was trying to do, and I think that will be very, very dangerous. In Germany, we're seeing, you know, we have this traffic light coalition led by the Social Democrats, but with the Liberals as the finance ministry, right? So responsible for fiscal policy, and they are insisting on going back to the national debt brake. And a big concern there there's already been issues about support for children in poverty and stuff. I could go into some details, but the basic message is that, you know, there's a sort of bit of a wave of austerity coming from the German government, which again, if this sort of, you know, catches around the other European countries, I think that's a big concern in the near future. So, you know, I think that's, you know, I mean, I don't want to advise you on which battles to pick, but, you know, I would think that, and I'm glad, as I say, that Esther and the ETUC are really pushing this, that, you know, that has to be the front, I think, or the to use sort of militaristic terminology, where really resources have to be concentrated, in my view. If compromises have to be made, then make them maybe somewhere else, if possible, to try and you know, salvage as much of what the Commission was trying to do on economic governance reform as possible. Okay, last points on this other issue of industrial policy and the IRA. So I see, I'm sure you see as well, two big debates. One is about China, and the other is about the USA. So on China, I'm generally a little bit confused. Maybe you can help me. I mean, it seemed a long time we were worried because China was too strong, and now we're sort of worried that China is too weak, and I'm not really sure exactly what is worse. What I understand is that the Commission wants to go for a de-risking rather than a decoupling approach. I appreciated the comments of the Spanish colleague who spoke just before this panel. I also think that, you know, actively decoupling from China would be a risky move. Also socially, by the way, if we don't get imports from China, it's going to make the transition, the ecological transition process in Europe a lot more expensive and cause a lot more distributional issues. On the IRA, it's often perceived as a threat there, I think, and again, it was good that Mr. Podesta spoke to us. And I think the IRA is actually very welcome in many ways, right? I mean, the US needs to catch up with us on reducing emissions per capita, and it's a very, very good initiative. It has this big social conditionality component, which I think is important. Can we do that in Europe? We're looking at this a little bit in the foundation. We hope to get some legal advice on this. Imposing social conditionality, requiring social conditionality in the European context is, I think, difficult. I'm not a lawyer. I'll be glad to hear if people can tell me that this can fly. As I say, we're planning to commission a study by lawyers into this matter. But otherwise, I think we're concerned about the disinvestment, the likelihood of disinvestment, if the Americans are offering big subsidies that might attract also European companies. Now, the European state aid rules have been opened up to prevent that in principle, that the governments are allowed to match subsidies. I don't know how long that's going to last for, but my understanding is that there's a sort of safeguard, if you like, now in the European rules on that issue. On the issue of energy costs, we have just published a study at our institute in German, which seems to sort of say that's maybe not such a big issue that people think it is. If we look at the lowest possible renewable energy costs we can achieve in Europe, they're not going to be that much higher than the US. Of course, then we need the capacity to produce the renewable energy in the low-cost countries or low-cost regions, and not in those regions within Europe which are offering the biggest subsidies. Right. Last slide, and I wind up. I think we have quite a lot of strengths in Europe to address these industrial policy issues. The big concern is that we sort of fragment and have a sort of sauve-qui-peut attitude where countries who have fiscal resources will support their industries at the cost of others. So the state aid rules, although they're often criticized on the center left, actually have a sort of social component, if you like, and prevent the strong within Europe sort of driving the weak to the wall. So I think we have some concerns about that. What's the solution? Well, the solution is, I think, to be found at the European level, right? What we need is a permanent recovery and resilience facility, call it what you want, a permanent sovereignty fund, which would partly finance European-wide investment, enable us to invest in the networks we need, in the energy and transport networks we need, and will help address some of the issues we have within the economic governance regime that I just talked about, where some national governments won't be able to do the public investment that they need to do. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much, Andrew. Let me move on to Laura de Bonfils, president of the Social Platform. That's the largest network of civil society organizations fighting for social justice in Europe. You would like to see a revision of the Social Pillar Action Plan, wouldn't you? Because that is what the Commission has proposed, but you're saying it doesn't go far enough. Tell us what more you would like to see. What more you would like to see Madame von der Leyen propose next week.
Thank you so much. So thank you. First, I would like just to say I'm the Secretary General, just for respect of our President. But yeah, thank you for inviting us. And I'm bringing the voice of Social Platform, that is the biggest European network of civil society organization working on social issues. So collectively, as many, like as well, Save the Children, like the next speaker, we unite tens of thousands of organizations and hundreds of millions of people in Europe in all of their diversity. So these are the people that are the most underrepresented in the decision-making process. So, and they are the ones that are also paying for some of the decisions that we're taking, and they're paying for the climate inactions or the measures
that we're taking for the transition, but as well for the implementation of the pillar. And some of the measures that don't take into consideration the well-being and the social consequences. So as all the other speakers have said, we would like to see more ambitious in the next proposals for the current final month of this administration, but then the next legislature. So, and we know that in S&D we have partners on that, but we would like to see more ambition. So when we ask our people, when we ask the people that we represent, they say that they want more social Europe, and this is our opportunity to put in place more ambitious environmental and climate policies. So, and these climate policies have to be accompanied by robust social policies that protect these marginalized people, but also that mitigate climate change. And they have to address, as many have said, the root causes of inequalities. So, as we said, we are a week from the next State of the Union speech, and the last one of von der Leyen, and just ahead of the European election. And this is the time to answer to what citizens want and need, and to commit to put in place a real social agenda that takes into consideration the social and environmental consideration, achieving sustainable well-being for all. So as Esther has said, we need, like von der Leyen needs to identify that we have we need to recognize that we have a social injustice emergency, and one of the proposals that we have as social platform, but together with other civil society organizations, is, for example, in July, we have launched a call to action asking policymakers and to a real commitment to social and environmentally just transition. So this have to go hand in hand with strengthening our social protection systems, as well as focusing on improving access to affordable and quality essential, but also social services. And those are like social services, and the funding of social services, it's all over the pillar, for example. So we asked the commitment to develop policy that put social and environmental dimensions together. And as we cannot we cannot continue putting in place siloed policies. So we need, on one hand, a new European Green Deal based on truly systematic change approach with, at the heart, policy coherence, as well as the review of the action plan, as you said, of the European Pillar of Social Rights, that has to take into consideration the environmental and climate impacts. So, as I said, we need social policy that tackles social economic inequality, that foster upward social convergence, reduce our carbon emission, and limit our environmental impact. These need to be accompanied by transformative environmental policy that foster creating high-quality jobs with living wages, with high union representation and collective bargaining. And this can be decoupled. So we've seen during the past crisis that those that were already worse off were hit the hardest, as they were the least prepared and the least resilient to overcome the different crises that were faced. And despite the different measures that we put in place to, like, for example, support some of the citizens during the pandemic, but as well to counter the cost of living crisis, but these were this is not enough, so we need to learn to these lessons and protect our people. And as I said, this requires strong, resilient, and well-funded social protection system, and the need to mitigate the effect on people and the current crisis, and accompanying them to the twin transition, so the digital, but also the environmental transition, and making sure that everyone has a floor to stand on throughout the life cycle, allowing them not just to survive, but also to thrive, as we see a lot of our social protection system throughout Europe are actually not sufficient. So they only allowed people to survive, but not to actually flourish. So, as I said, we need a strong protection floor, and also, like, this floor, this different social policy need to take into consideration the consequences of climate change. And this can only be done through a full and ambitious implementation of the Pillar of Social Rights, and this, as the pillar and its implementation, has to be at the top of the next EU agenda. And as you said as well, the Commission has put in place the provision of the revision of the action plan in 2025, but this has to be very ambitious. So the policy that will be proposed, they have to really make the 20 pillar principles into a reality.
Because let me ask you about that action plan, because three things that I saw by the action plan was reducing the number of people living in poverty, to increase the employment rate among people to 78%, and that 60% of the workforce should participate in training each year. That's not ambitious enough to you?
Yeah, what we see, for example, is not that it's not only not ambitious enough, it's also what the policies that we're putting in place now will not deliver. For example, just looking at the reduction of poverty. Currently, we are not going in, we're going in one direction, but we still have a lot to do. So joining the others, one of our proposals is we need to work on the economic governance review, but as well an important policy that we ask as a social platform is a minimum income directive. We want to see, as this parliament has asked, led by actually S&D, like a request on having a directive in the next action plan. So we need, because the targets that we have now, even if they're not ambitious enough, they will not be delivered if we progress like this. So that would be one of the things that we're asking.
Okay. Let me move then, I'd like to segue to that, with the action plan, to Katerina Nanu, Head of Domestic Advocacy and Partnerships, Save the Children Europe. You've worked yourself as a social worker. You've researched child protection and child care reform. And of course, there is a European child guarantee to tackle poverty. I think you'd like to see that strengthened. And I just might mention, in that action plan that the Commission is supposed to be doing, they're supposed to pull, excuse me, they're supposed to pull 15 million people out of poverty, including 5 million children. I guess to you that's probably not enough either, is it?
Hello, and thank you first of all very much for the invite to this very important event. And yes, indeed. So the child guarantee, first of all, let me say that the child guarantee was initiated by the Socialists and Democrats, and this is very important to acknowledge, and that the European Parliament has very much supported in making this a reality. And I have to say that the child guarantee is a historic instrument, a very comprehensive and very robust framework that it really gives the opportunity to member states, to all EU member states, to put together national action plans that will address child poverty. And indeed, 5 million, so lifting 5 million children out of poverty is not enough, considering that today, 1 in 4 children grow up in poverty, at risk of poverty in the EU. This is unacceptable. I mean, the EU is one of the most prosperous, and I would say in many, many ways, and in many cases it is the agenda setter, right, and is really a champion when it comes to human rights. And it is unacceptable that in a union like this, we have 1 in 4 children, so 20 million children growing up at risk of poverty. And what I wanted also to stress is that it is a pan-European issue. So we're not talking about countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. So what is the most striking? It is that countries like Germany, for example, they have 24% of children in Germany grow up at risk of poverty. In France, 27.4%. And this is Eurostat data, right, from 2022 that I refer to. In Sweden, 20%. So who would expect that countries like this would really not have policies in place and not have measures in place to support children. So yes, 5 million children obviously is not enough, because also we see that this number is continuously increased, also due to the cost of living crisis. So, the Save the Children report, right, the previous report, showcased that the serious consequences that the COVID-19 pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and the climate crisis are having on children all over the continent, right? And I'm going to give some examples, for example, from Save the Children Finland, our colleagues, and I'm taking examples from the Nordic countries because I want to stress that this is actually a pan-European crisis. So they highlight that in the Nordic countries, where extreme weather conditions make heating houses an absolute priority, right? The increase in energy prices means that many households might not be able to adequately heat their homes this winter, and also with food prices too high compared to social security benefits and salaries, many children are expected to suffer from the lack of healthy food, regular warm meals, and sufficient nutrition. And slide, yes, please. So, Save the Children Sweden, on the other hand, reports that many non-profit organizations have seen an increase in the number of families seeking assistance and have warned about the impact on children. And this takes me back to the child guarantee. And it is, I think that the Commission President, looking back, she needs to, I think, acknowledge the fact that we have a framework like that. At the same time, I think it is very important that she stresses the importance of implementing it, right? So, for example, we are talking about issues like, about the European Year of Skills or other issues that they focus on the youth and on which I'm not saying that they are not important, but we need to start from children. I mean, if we start from children, and if we invest in children, in their education, right, in having, and what Esther mentioned before, that children will definitely do better. We can also think about ourselves. We'll definitely do better if they grow up in stable families, if they follow an education system that is equal and that it is of good quality, right? So this is not nuclear science. It is really, I mean, we know what it is needed. And I think the fact that we have, and this commission put together the child guarantee during this term, it is something that really we need to capitalize on. And I'm going to link that also with Ukraine, right? So, for example, I was reading the proposal for a regulation for the facility, the Ukraine facility regulation. And children are not mentioned, not even once in the regulation. So this is, again, unacceptable. So children are one of the most vulnerable groups in Ukraine, right? And we, as the EU, of course, we're going to provide 50 billion euros for the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. But we really need to focus on children and on child poverty reduction. Child poverty is, it gets increased, and it is, of course, it is very much linked with the overall situation of employment, of unemployment, and so on, right? And of the social protection systems as well in Ukraine. So what we are considering it is that also the child guarantee, it needs to be used as a framework from the Ukrainian government, and also that the regulation itself should support child poverty reduction measures also in line with the child guarantee.
The Temporary Protection Directive.
Yes,
and talk about that you'd like to take it to the next level.
Yes.
For 2 million
yes.
Ukrainian children. What do you mean? You mean making it, applying the child guarantee to them? Is that what you mean?
No. So this is another thing. Yes, to them as well, but this is also related to the migration crisis that we have in the EU. And last year, Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the Union speech, very rightly said that the Ukraine response, or the response towards the Ukrainians in the EU, should be used as a blueprint, right, moving forward for all people for all people seeking asylum in the EU. Now, of course, this is not the case. And although it was wonderful that she said it, and we agree 100% with her, because honestly, what we have seen with the Ukrainians, and with Ukrainian children in particular, it is the way forward. EU member states opened their doors, citizens opened their doors. So this is how we need to protect, and this is how we need support, and this is how we need to welcome, especially, well, I am Save the Children, right? So children in the EU. And this is not what we have seen, actually, and we're very much worried because currently there are the negotiations for the EU Pact on Migration, and what we see is a reluctance from member states to agree on the specific regulation and to put children's rights in the heart of the regulation. So what we are calling, and what I would love Ursula von der Leyen to mention next week, it is that, you know, we really need to make this, to turn this into reality. We really need to make to take the example of how the EU welcomed Ukrainians to the next level and to be reflected in the EU Pact on Migration. So, yeah.
Okay. Did you have? Were you done with your slides? Or?
Yes, I have one more slide. Well,
Go,
it is
yeah.
okay.
Okay, go ahead.
But perhaps, and one slide after, so I mentioned that, and perhaps what I would like to to finish with, it is something related to our democracies. And I think that, again, this Commission has been very supportive when it comes to children's rights. And the establishment of the EU's first child participation platform, it is a milestone in the EU's history, right? What we're saying is that with this framework, it's also history in the making. Last June, we brought, and I'm saying we because Save the Children is also one of the implementers of the child participation platform, we brought 60 children from across the EU, where they discussed with EU decision makers about their future and their present, right? And I think that what it is, again, what it is very, very important is to acknowledge how the role of children in our democracies, because if we invest in children now to know their rights, to be able to give them voice and to be able to share what they are thinking, what their needs are, one, our societies will be much better prepared to support them, but also the children, are going to become more involved citizens. And this is what we all strive for, more involved and more informed citizens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions in these last few minutes? We've got a bit of time. Any questions? Yes, please. If you give your name and title, please. Yeah.
Yes, I have not a question, but some concerns. I am Jos Bertrand. I am the president of ESO. ESO is the European Senior Organization, who is bringing together the organization with pensioners, with seniors all over in the social democratic world.
Which is also in the
we are
social
member of the
pillar. It's on pensions, definitely. That's in the list of 20.
Yeah, I have three things to say. First of all, when we were disputing the resolution for the Congress, for the PES, and we have the first drafts, I look also to what we said before the last elections and the four last elections. And what I see is that we forget the demographic challenge. There is nobody is talking about the demography shortage in the labor market. And it is a huge problem in our society. And my question is, where is this important issue for our family? That's one. Second, it's about Principle 20 of the Pillar of Social Rights. It's about digitalization. We are talking about opportunities of digitalization, but also digitalization is a new concern, as it is a motor, as it is a source for new exclusion. And I think when looking what the Commission was doing on the social pillar, there is nothing done on digitalization. We see now how digitalization is a new source of exclusion, and not only for the seniors, but also for people who are not able to work with it. And talking about services, we see now I am involved in local policy. As a local authority, we take over, for instance, in the financial sector, the banks, because of digitalization, are closing their services to the normal people. On the local level, we engage now not only social assistance, but digital assistance paid by the public money, because the banks will make more gains, more wins, closing their help to the people, and we as public authority take it over. I think we need to make some action in this digitalization, not only speaking about opportunities of digitalization, but also to digitalization as a possible new source of exclusion. And at least it's about, I will talk about solidarity. As ESO, for us, is not only to speak about interest of seniors, but the first of all, our core business is talking about solidarity between generations. I remember I am in politics in the 80s, we were talking about eradication of poverty. And in the third way, it was Blair who talked about child poverty. And we were very against only to treat on child poverty. Because if you will exterminate child poverty, you need to work on poverty. When you will eradicate child poverty, you need to eradicate poverty.
Right.
And I think what was saying about economic, it's very important. When we will work against poverty, we have to look how we can work in the economic, that the economic can more distribute what the gains. And I come back to what Agnes was saying in the beginning. It's not only to make the pie bigger, but to have something to say in the bakery.
Okay.
And there I found what Mr. Watts was saying about economic. It's an old history. But we need to come back to what he was saying. We as socialists, we need to go to the economics, because there we have the funds to make our social policy. And that I find it very important. And I think for the new program and for the last year, I think that we have to insist on it. Thank you.
Very good. Many good points there. But let's start with the labor question about the labor gap, the demographics of labor. Maybe you could answer that, Esther.
Sure. So I was looking yesterday about where the labour gaps are and the type of jobs where the labour gaps are. You're looking at truck drivers, care workers. You're looking also in manufacturing. So you're also looking in hospitality. Now, what quite a few of those jobs have in common, so we say the truck driving, the hospitality, and the care work, is it's all very, very difficult work, in which when you're talking to workers who work in those sectors, they talk very, very quickly in the conversation, you'll hear burnout and you'll hear stress. And so you've got low pay, very difficult conditions of employment, and then we all sit around in rooms like this saying, how come we have a skills gap, you know? And I think part of the conversation is the quality jobs gap. That by improving the pay, by improving the terms and conditions, and by making those conditions manageable for people, you know, that people can go and do a day of work in care or in nursing or in and then come home at the end of the day without having negatively impacted on your emotional, psychological, or physical well-being. I think that's part of the conversation. It's just one other thing I really want to say on this. The other is, and you mentioned it yourself about the number, the target of how many workers to have in training. Yeah. Now, the biggest challenge to that is people can't get the time off for training, they can't afford to do the training, or if it's provided at a time that they can't. So that's one of the things we very much want. We've been calling for a decade of skills, and part of that needs to be the right to training, and to make sure that people can get access to training, that they have the right to anticipation of change, so you know the types of jobs that are going to be available, and that you can then equip yourself to be able to apply for them. And when you get that job, that you can negotiate for decent paying conditions to improve that outcome. So I very much welcome the question. Just on a personal basis, I think you're absolutely right about the ATMs, because it is a scandal that people have to pay to get their own money at the end of a working week or from their pension. And I know for a pensioner, €5 or €3 a month is a lot of money. Like, I know that. So it is a problem that people have to pay so much to get their money out of ATMs, and that they're not available. So I'd encourage you to keep going, raising this constant concern about the change to the way in which banking used to be a service we could all rely on, and it's no longer that.
Agnes, can I go to you on that digitalization and exclusion? How do you hope to fight that?
The thing is, the way I see it, is that those people who are doing the policy making here in the bubble can hardly imagine that there are people outside of the bubble who are working with a different type of reality. I think, like I come from the Netherlands, and there, let's say, every year we have these figures in which we say, so we are a population of 17 million people, 1.5 million people are not able to be truly independent in reading and writing. And this number is as high as this for decades on a row. And in a way, when we are saying, okay, you can do your tax forms online, if you say you have to ask for your child benefits online, this is really a problem which people who are not aware of the fact that there is this group of people outside of the bubble and we are not able to slim it down, it's really a problem. I do see a lot of good initiatives at the national level, and not that much at the European level, I must say, but something is happening. For instance, libraries are playing quite an important role in this. But yes, I think we should all be aware when drafting up policies and legislation that there are people, but even me, I cannot survive in this world without my team, who are much more savvy in all the electronics as I am. And I know I'm privileged, and I know a lot of people are not.
So a couple final words from someone, either answering some of the points that
Can I make one remark on the child poverty, because Jos was making questions about. I think the problem with the targets in the action plan, 50 million and 5 million, especially where. I think not the biggest problem is not that the question is this enough or not. The real problem is that although we promised 2 years ago that we would reduce poverty, the number of people in poverty has increased. And this is happening with children, and it's happening in general. So just a target in an action plan applause for that, but that's not enough to get it done.
So a quick lightning round with the other speakers, 30 seconds-ish. What would you like our takeaway to be from this conference, from the expectations of the State of the Union message next week? What would you like to see in that message next week? Yeah, let's start.
So yeah, as I said, we would like to see more commitment to social Europe, and as well, just to continue on what Agnes was saying, yes, many policymakers maybe don't know the reality, but that can be done as well, increasing the dialogue with people, and that can also be done with more civil dialogue, more social dialogue. Like, for example, with civil dialogue, we represent the citizen, as I said, the one that are the most vulnerable, and we can bring their experience and their needs and actually support policy, like a more fair policy making that takes into account what are the realities of people and what are the needs and how can we address their needs. So that's one of them.
Very good. Caterina, please.
Yes. So I already mentioned what I would like Ursula von der Leyen to focus on next week, but I think that I would like to stress the issue around child poverty, and that we cannot talk about reducing poverty if we don't start by reducing child poverty, because child poverty leads to a cycle of disadvantage, right? And this is what we need to be fighting for. We see that children growing up in poverty, they will continue living in poverty for the rest of their lives. So really, you need to go back to the root. You really need to start from addressing social and child protection systems, right, at national level through and the child guarantee is an excellent way to do that, but we need to do it. Member states need to do it, and they need to work with civil society organizations, with children themselves, and so on, in order to create plans that they are realistic and that they can actually be implemented. And of course, migration, very, very important. The pact, very important that we make sure that the legislation that hopefully is going to be agreed in the next months is really human rights centered, right? And that we don't have a legislation, a regulation that's going to be criminalizing children and people for seeking asylum in the EU. So, yeah.
Andrew, a final word as well. I'm just thinking on a macro level, on a European level, to finance all of this, we have to have more own resources. We have to have Europe-wide, some kind of Europe-wide tax, right? And that's being done on national levels. What do you think on a macro-European level?
Can I just quickly say a word to the colleague, because no one's answered his point about demography, which is a huge issue we can't go into now, but I think it's a really important point. You know, we've had large cohorts going through the labour market. They're now going through the retirement system, right? And this is absorbing, of course, in the public finances, differences between countries, blah, blah, blah. But in all countries, I believe, it's absorbing more resources, right? And then we start to get, you know, within, if you like, the social pot that's available, conflicts between, let's say, fighting child poverty and fighting poverty amongst pensioners, right? And we end up in these very unpleasant discussions that we can essentially only resolve by getting more people into work, trying to solve the labour shortages, you know, where it's due to sickness and lack of health, or people who, as you said rightly, that because they've been poor in their childhood, they have health issues or psychological issues, other issues. All these things need to be resolved. Too much to discuss now, but that's a very important point. Own resources, and yeah, so I mean, I made a plug for, you know, I don't think we can make Europe really work without some sort of central fiscal capacity. Mario Draghi, you know, the ex-ECB chef, is now in The Economist making the same argument, right? So the European Commission is making the same argument. It was only sort of the left who was making this argument 10, 20 years ago, right? So I think there's some progress there, and I hope that we whatever form it takes, but you know, with the Recovery and Resilience Facility, I think we have a sort of model about how it could work, where the Commission borrows money on the markets and either gives it or lends it out to the countries, which then have to follow some sort of, you know, European agreed rules. I think this basic model, we can discuss the parameters and how much distribution there is and blah, blah, blah. I think that's the way to go, and it could then this money could be paid back by increased own resources, right? That's not a difficult issue. Maybe, but there's a better place to judge that than I'm. A difficult political issue because no politician wants to talk about European taxes, right? But that, you have to find a language to make that acceptable to voters and to show to voters that they're actually getting something from the other side of it that they're interested in having. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We are wrapping up at this point. The final words, the final conclusion from Agnes. How was the day for you? How productive was this? Where do we go from here with all this information? What calls to action do you give now?
Oh dear, there are numerous calls for action, and I think let me start by saying we heard them, and we're going to work on it, of course, in preparation of the State of the Union and our response to the State of the Union. I thought it was interesting that you said in the beginning it will be the last State of the Union of von der Leyen. I don't think she thinks that herself. But I'd like the remark because that would mean that we are going to win the elections. And that's indeed it's high time that someone from our political family is taking the helm of the Commission. But my lesson would be that indeed, of course, if you look back and see the progress we have made, we know we made the progress not first and foremost because we are pragmatic, but because we are dedicated to see how we can push our policies through. And of course, working in the European Parliament, you have to find your friends in other political families to get a majority. You have to work on the European governments to see the logic and the fairness of the proposals that you are making. But I think first and foremost, you have to have this clear plan. What are you aiming at? And I think in that sense, this little blue booklet is really helpful because it's all in there. Huh? And I used to say, I cannot go to the grocery shops and say, here's my European pillar, again, I get my groceries for this month. So it needs to be transposed in real legislation. No, we ticked a few boxes, but there are quite a lot of boxes remaining. I think one of the overarching ways of pushing for more of this is this social conditionality thing. And I'm really going to look into what kind of juridical problems there could be, because I cannot imagine, but I'm just a simple historian, so I don't know all about the law, but I think with social conditionalities we can have the money work for our goals, and that would be helpful. I think it would also be helpful to make concrete results.
Yeah, and so among concrete results, we have a year left.
Yeah.
What realistically would be a couple priorities that you would see in this next year in that social pillar that you can realistically achieve before the next election?
Okay, before the next election, we definitely need to finish the platform directive, because these are workers who are totally out of our social protection schemes. And I know that some people say, let's say, for instance, Macron, if Uber is not hiring the people from the banlieues of Paris, who is? But that's not a reason to mistreat them as it's being done. So that's one thing we really should finish in this year. I think we could also finish the debate about economic governance, but much more resistance. It will be quite a hard fight to keep the proposal of the Commission on the table. But I must say, but perhaps I'm over asking, I would like to have more than just a proposal which is on the table, but there is a lot of pressure on that topic. I also would like really to see Nicolas Schmid coming up with this proposal on quality traineeships, because I think I do care about child poverty. But I also think that people who are starting their working life should be properly paid from the beginning. And then more in general, I think during this day, we had, let's say, two kinds of Americas being sketched for us. And that's the America of Biden and Podesta, and I think we should learn that lesson. But we also had the example of the American Chamber of Commerce walking around, also America, but with a completely different agenda. And I know it's important that Ukraine wins this war as soon as possible. But we also should take care that then they could be part of the European family, can be with that booklet as a signal or a guiding principle for creating the post-war society.
And that we should be striving to that with them before the end of the war. We should be doing that now.
Yes, and yes, indeed, before the end of the war, because we are of course, trying to be as supportive as possible to end the war as soon as possible. But there are reconstruction programs, but we should have these in there too for the child guarantee, but also for all the others things which are sketched in this booklet. And I know last State of the Union, von der Leyen was quite vocal on Ukraine. She can do it again. And then with this booklet and Ukraine combined, I think that would be a very good last State of the Union of von der Leyen.
Agnes Jongerius and all the speakers, please give them a big hand. Thank you. Also, a big thanks to the technicians, to the interpreters. Thanks to all of you. A big hand to them as well. Good work. And we invite all of you, including the interpreters and the technicians, to a cocktail, a networking cocktail afterward. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to all of you for your questions and your comments. And keep in mind, #SocialEurope and #SOTEU for anything you'd like to cast wider. Thank you very much. I'm Chris Burns. See you next time.